guys, Jay here, welcome to Eons of Battle, and today I want to talk about the Space Marines because I've been steadily putting together my Space Marine army, getting them all ready to rock and roll for 10th edition. And we all just experienced the great Space Marine culling of 2023, where a whole bunch of the classic kits went no longer available. They still have index rules, and I'm definitely still going to play with them, but it makes me wonder because they didn't get rid of all of the old squatty Marines, and so which ones are safe? Which ones are on the chopping block next? There's a few I think can probably go, but for the most part, I think what's left is probably gonna stick around for a while. I have some ideas of what the future of Space Marines will look like, and I also have some ideas for what they should do. One thing that I hope never disappears is the classic tactical Marine squad. I really hope the TAC squad doesn't go anywhere because I really like the Crusader squad, the classic Crusader squad for the Black Templar. And according to the index rules, they actually kind of went back to the classic 6th edition min squad of 5 with maximum special weapons, the old Las Plaz Power Fist, which is a great little cheap unit for the Black Templar. You actually can't do it for regular Space Marines anymore, but you can for the Black Templar. Probably a little bit of an oversight like it was back in the day, but it doesn't matter. 75 points for all of that good shooting goodness is really, really nice to have. And even if they do get written out of the game, I'll just use the Legends rules to bring them back in because they're just so awesome and I have so many of them. I don't think the TAC squad is going anywhere, and technically the TAC squad comes in at least 3 flavors because you have the regular tactical squad and then you also have the Horus Heresy, the Mark IV, Mark V, and Mark III armors. So there's a lot of different options available to regular tactical squad Space Marines. Not that great anymore, arguably have never been super amazing. The reason that you used to bring TAC squads is because you had to bring troops. And actually for a long time, having to bring troops meant you brought tons and tons of scouts if you wanted to play incredibly competitively because the scouts were just more efficient at doing the things you would typically do with your TAC squad, which is hold down objectives. But the TAC squad is classic. The only thing missing from the TAC squad right now is the ability to be a small 5-man unit because now they can't go in Razorbacks because Razorbacks have a transport capacity of 5 or 6. I don't remember if it's 5 or 6, but it's not 10. And so you can't bring a proper squad of TAC Marines in a Razorback, which is too bad because the Razorback is kind of the better Rhino. It's not many more points than the Rhino. But speaking of the Rhino, as long as the TAC squad is still alive, the Rhino is still alive. For sure. The Rhino is one of the most classic kits ever invented by Games Workshop. The original plastic Rhino, which I have several of, are hilariously bare bones. Literally, the front of the Rhino is also the back of the Rhino. You just flip it like 90 degrees or 180 degrees, and then it was like the smallest number of parts they could possibly have to be a tank. And the current Rhino, the classic Rhino, is a box. It is a little plastic box. Everyone else's vehicles look so much cooler. The Eldar, the Tau, the Orc truck, like all of their vehicles are so kind of cool and techy and sci-fi. But there's something special about the Space Marine metal box, especially if you get the Razorback metal box, because it also comes with a lot more details and extra add-ons that you can glue on and make it look a little bit more impressive. But I think as long as we got the TAC squad, the Razorback and the Rhino are safe, and probably the Predator too, and the Vindicator. There's so many platforms that the Rhino is meant for. You got those spawns and hard spots. You've got the two slots for gunners. Like the Rhino is kind of perfect. And the new Primaris vehicles are pretty much the exact same thing. They have the same amount of hard points. They actually have a lot more weapons and weapon options than the classic Rhino. So one day we'll probably see the end of the Rhino. I don't see the Rhino as a kit that might get Primarisized, maybe as a super cheap transport for the Primaris, because currently it's really hard to buy a transport for the Primaris because the Primaris squad is very expensive, and then their transport is monstrously expensive, where, you know, TAC squad is what, like 100 and some points, and then the Rhino's 80. Super cheap, very easy to put together a squad of Space Marines and a Rhino. But speaking of that Razorback's small transport capacity, the Devastator Space Marine squad, another very classic Space Marine kit. I should not take them as I am a Black Templar player and we are all about close combat. I have about 40 Devastator Marines with every single weapon. I've got like 6 las cannons, 8 missile launchers, grav guns, everything available, and they're pretty snazzy. One thing that they actually paid attention to with the index is if you bring a 5-man squad, it's pretty expensive, but then if you bring it up to 10-man squad, the 5 extra Space Marines are actually much less expensive than the first 5 because you can't bring heavy weapons on the rest of the squad. So that big initial purchase of 4 heavy weapon guys and a sergeant is much more expensive than just 5 more normal dude Space Marines. So that's a really, really nice way of doing it with the index. The Devastator squad is classic. They pair very well with the Razorback because the Razorback has a special rule where if it shoots something, anything that hops out of that Razorback that turn can then get a +1 to hit, or it can get a better hitting on the thing if they aim at the same target that the Razorback did. It's technically, it's kind of like a spotter rule that a lot of Tau units have. But yeah, you can make the unit inside just a little bit better with the Razorback. And because there's a 5-man squad, they can actually take advantage of going into a Razorback. Kind of the only thing that can. I guess you could take a min squad of scouts, but who's taking a min squad of scouts? I guess a min squad of sniper scouts. Although sniper scouts are now gone. Long live the sniper scouts. And I'm almost sure we're going to get Primaris scouts when that new codex comes out this winter. And I'm excited for it because once again, Crusader squad, Primaris Crusader squad this time, it would be really nice to have a whole bunch of extra intercessor and scout bodies so that I can just make my own Crusader squads instead of having to buy the Black Templar Crusader squad box. But I think Tactical Marines and Devastator Marines are safe for now. Things that maybe aren't so safe, I would guess, is the Storm Talon gunship and the weird little offspring of it, the Storm Hawk Interceptor. The Storm Hawk Interceptor is a weird little addition in 2016 where flyers were kind of a big deal and everybody was getting a super fun new flyer, and so they thought the Space Marines should have another one. And so they took the Storm Talon gunship and added a new sprue that sort of turned it into a new plane that basically just looks like the old plane with a little bit more assault cannons. It's just a weird thing that exists. Recently reboxed with the new style of Games Workshop flying stand, which is much better than the old weird X-shaped one. Still not the most beautiful thing in the world because flying stands just don't look that good. In your brain, you're like, oh, it's a clear peg, so it doesn't exist. But in reality, it's a super glossy, shiny Lego lightsaber of plastic that instantly draws the eye. But the new flight stand does look miles better than the old one. The Storm Talon gunship and the Storm Hawk Interceptor are both kits. I don't see them very often on like Instagram or Daka or Facebook. But I mean, I have a Storm Talon gunship. And man, I haven't played with that model in years and years. I'm not a big fan of flyers in Warhammer 40,000. Some armies can take advantage of their flyers a little bit better than others, like the Guard and their Vendettas and Valkyries. But for the Space Marines, I feel like it's all about boots on the ground. There's only one flyer that I really have any interest in, and it's a flyer that I think is very much safe. The Storm Raven gunship, the Big Mac box with wings. This model is classic, it is chunky, it has no aerodynamics to speak of whatsoever. It can transport one Dreadnought in addition to a bunch of Space Marines because it hangs off of the back. It is awesome. It's very expensive. It's always been very expensive. I don't have one in my army, although I would like 2 in my Grey Knights army. Although Grey Knights now have so much teleportation and reinforcement shenanigans that they might not need a transport anymore like they used to. The Storm Raven gunship is pretty classic. It's kind of small. By new Primaris standards, you wouldn't really want it to be much bigger because, again, another problem with flyers is real flying vehicles like jet fighters and stuff are massive. And so if they built it to scale, it would probably take up a quarter of the board. It would be as big as probably like the Thunderhawk gunship is in real life. But you can't have something like that in a game, so it's probably half scale, or maybe even quarter scale. Like vehicles in Warhammer 40,000 are probably half scale, and then the flyers are quarter scale, and it gets a little bit ridiculous. But I'd be interested to see what they do with flyers. If they come out with some sort of a Primaris flyer, I could see all 3 of these just go in the way of the dodo immediately, because they're kind of awkward vehicles that don't really necessarily do much better than some of the Space Marine units already available. And it just doesn't really, Space Marines don't feel like they need the air superiority backup. They're more of a surgical strike, drop in with drop pods, or swooped in on a Thunderhawk gunship and pooped out and then complete their mission, as opposed to kind of a mobile army marching up the battlefield with air supports. It's a little bit interesting, but I think for now, the Storm Talon gunship is definitely in a good place, or the Storm Raven gunship is in a good place. The other two, I don't know if they'd be a good pickup, and they're just not that great of units. The Drop Pod is probably the most classic kit that the Games Workshops have. It's right up there with the Land Raider, 2008, a beautiful kit, kind of a bummer to put together, but it's amazing. It's the exact right size it needs to be, so I think if they Primaris sized it, they wouldn't be able to make it any bigger than it is, because it's actually a fairly large kit to start with. And it's just so great. It's got the amusement park ride, like little shoulder arm brace that keeps you in your seats. It is a classic kit. I think the only thing that could make the drop pod Primaris sized is maybe replacing its Stormbolter / missile launcher with some sort of a Primaris weapon, which would be kind of nice because a Stormbolter isn't really cutting it these days. Arguably, it hasn't been doing its job for a very long time. 4 shots at 12 inches, 2 shots at 24 inches is not gonna do really any work. Obviously, you're paying the 70 points for a drop pod for deep strike capabilities, that turn 1 deep strike, as opposed to the weapon system that it comes with that the enemy actually has to walk within range of because the vehicle is completely immobile when it enters the battlefield. But I would hope that the drop pod, if the drop pod does see any new Primarisification, it's just a weapon swap. And that's what I would say for a lot of the Space Marine vehicles, specifically my favorite Space Marine vehicle, everyone's favorite Space Marine vehicle, the Land Raider. Probably the greatest kit Games Workshop has ever made. It's a remarkable engineering feat where if you open the assault ram, both doors kind of open up by themselves. It's kind of amazing. It has so many sponson slots. It has so many weapon options. It is one of my favorite kits of all time. Well worth a magnetization. I don't particularly love magnetizing kits because it's really fussy to do, but with a Land Raider, you absolutely have to. I really wish they still sold the extra sponsons separately. They did that for the longest time, and so you could buy 1 Land Raider kit and like 2 sponson kits, and then have every single option available. Now you're currently stuck with buying each Land Raider separately, but I think the Land Raider still does work. All of its weapons are pretty darn excellent. I don't know if I love the changes to twin linked. I love that things aren't just 2 guns bolted together now, because I think it made things way too killy and way too swingy. It was a really fun change in 8th edition when everything just got double the number of shots. You're rolling more dice, you have more ability to do damage. But I think the classic twin linked of reroll the hit was just a better mechanic because you had more reliable damage dealing. Now it's reroll the wound, which is kind of an interesting way to do it. So you have fewer numbers of hits, but a more successful wound rate is kind of interesting. But the Land Raider. Another thing I really wish that Games Workshop would do more of is consider vehicle weapons different than infantry weapons. Like a las cannon's a las cannon's las cannon's a las cannon, but it doesn't have to be. Like there should be Rhino las cannons or Land Raider las cannons that have different profiles, because even if you look at the physical models, they're massively bigger. They're mounted on vehicles. And so it would make sense for them to be a little bit better than the man-portable ones carried by Devastator squads. And I think you could make them just a little bit better. And you just make a new profile. Vehicle heavy bolter, vehicle assault cannon. I don't know, I just think it's very, very doable, and it would make a little bit more sense, and it would give some vehicles just a little bit more teeth. Speaking of vehicles that I have absolutely no faith in right now, the venerable Dreadnought, and not even listed on the Games Workshop web store under Space Marines, the Contemptor Dreadnought. Both still available in the Space Marine Index currently, and so they definitely have rules moving forward. And even if they're left out of the Space Marine Codex, you'll still have very current Legends rules for them. So you won't have any problem actually bringing them in your games of Warhammer 40,000. but I think the days of the classic box knot are probably coming to an end. I have about 13. I love the Dreadnought so much. I also have a bunch of the Primaris Dreadnoughts too, because they're also pretty slick. But I'm gonna miss the classic box knot. They're an interesting unit. They kind of are a holdover from like the classic days of like 3rd, 4th, and 5th edition Warhammer, when heavy and special weapons were truly heavy and special and they really felt amazing, because 90% of your army was walking around with bolters, but all of a sudden you have an assault cannon walking around on your Dreadnought. Now the assault cannon isn't even that good compared to half of the Primaris stuff. You've got Hellblasters and Infernus Marines wandering around, Gravis Armor Inceptors. Like, there's just so much awesome firepower available to the Space Marines now that the little Dreadnought and his arm-mounted heavy flamer is just not much of anything, really. It's kind of sad. They've been doing their work for thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years, but yeah, I think they are really struggling right now. And I can't wait to see what they do with Dreadnoughts when the Space Marine Codex actually comes out, because the Ballistus Dreadnoughts is kind of bad. It just doesn't have enough firepower, and losing out on the close combat arm means that they're just kind of bad in close combat and don't want to be charged. It's kind of the Ballistus Dreadnought has kind of fallen into the same problem that the regular Dreadnoughts have fallen into, in which they just don't have quite enough firepower to offset. And they're very tanky and they're very tough, but they just don't really have a great role to fulfill because the Space Marine range has gotten so big. With that said though, I still have a bunch of Contemptor Dreadnoughts and a bunch of Dreadnoughts to put together, and I'm gonna do it, and I'm gonna paint them up, and I'm gonna play with them, and they're gonna be absolutely glorious. But yeah, the Dreadnoughts, the classic Dreadnoughts, I think are a risky purchase. Vanguard Veteran Squad is for some reason still on the web store. Don't buy the Vanguard Veteran Squad. They were OP in 9th edition when you could take Thunder Hammers or Lightning Claws on every single person in the squad. I actually have 2 10-man squads, one armed with Thunderhammer and one armed with Lightning Claws. They're very good. Right now, all of their weapons are called heirloom weapons and have just kind of a profile. It doesn't matter if you have it doesn't matter what weapon option you took on them. They're all heirloom weapons. And I'm not gonna be too sad to see them go, because I am completely positive that we're gonna be getting some new Primaris intercessors that have jump packs, some proper assault intercessors, and I cannot wait for that to happen. The only thing I'm a little bit nervous about is how this new Primaris jump pack is going to look. I assume it's going to be identical to the jump pack we saw in some of the trailer material for Space Marine 2, and it looks okay, like it looks very good, but the regular jump packs on Primaris bodies look really good. And so I'm almost considering just buying up a whole bunch of the jump pack sprues that are still on the web store for some reason. I have absolutely no idea why. I guess it's because there's still index rules for things like Chaplain in jump pack or Primaris or a Space Marine Librarian with jump pack. And so that's the only reason that it's still on the web store, is so that people can buy that and actually put that miniature together, because there's rules for it. It's been there for as long as I've been playing Warhammer, just a little sprue of 5 jump packs. It's kind of awesome, and I might just buy that and use the old jump pack as the new Primaris models, because they finally look appropriate. The old Space Marine, like Primaris shares shoulder pads and heads with Space Marines, because the old Space Marines are just so weird bobble-headed guys. And so yeah, I think that's probably what I'm going to be doing moving forward. Don't buy Vanguard Veterans. They're gone. I don't know why they're still on the web store. They got rid of the regular Assault Marine Squad, which is weird because they're actually much better in terms of rules than the Vanguard Veteran Squad. And the old squad, the Assault Terminator Squad, that one's gone too. They're gonna be replaced. They're gonna be replaced by a beautiful new plastic Terminator kit that looks just as good as the ones from the Leviathan box. I have the ones from the Leviathan box. They're gorgeous. Absolutely cannot wait for that. Really, the only old Squaddy Marine thing left is the Centurion Squad. I think the Centurion Squad is perfectly safe. They're not that old, and you can't actually see the Space Marine armor inside of the Centurion warsuit anyway, so it might as well be Primaris in there as opposed to regular Squaddy Space Marines in Mark 7 or Mark 8 armor. So the Centurion Squad, I think, is currently safe. Currently, the rules for them are not amazing. They're probably really, really overcosted. Incredibly strong, tough units, but There's also other ways of getting things really, really tough. Like if you play the Black Templar like I do, it's not that hard to get a 5-up invulnerable save on your Marines, which is also incredibly powerful and tanky. But yeah, I think this the changeover to Primaris Space Marines, I know a lot of people have been saying that Space Marines have lost their flavor. A tiny piece of me agrees with that because I like the idea of these ultra powerful knights in high-tech armor that are using tanks from World War I. And the new Primaris vehicles do not have that aesthetic going on. I don't necessarily mind the new Primaris tanks. I think most of them look pretty good. And apart from the Invader ATV, I like every single Primaris unit. Even the Nerf gun, squirt gun, missile launcher guys, I don't know. I kind of like the look of, I kind of like the idea of them, a bunch of missile launchers. I will definitely be kit bashing my own or finding some STLs or something. I know that there's STLs of the 30K missile launcher where it's kind of mounted on their shoulder like a boombox and it has like a clip of missiles. Might have to find some STLs of those, scale them up like 20%, and maybe that will be my missile launcher Space Marines. It's a little hard to predict what's gonna happen with the Space Marine range, but one thing that is never hard to predict is our Patreon. Over there, we have a brand new STL terrain set every single month. This month, we have the Corpse Starch Factory, an entire battlefield full of machines that make humans from humans. We also make extra episodes of Eons of Battle, and we have a tier you can get your name on one of my Black Templar Space Marines, and you can join the crusade. The last Space Marine kit that I actually bought was the Space Marine Assault Bike, and I literally purchased it 3 days before they said that it was leaving the web store forever. But you know what? I'm gonna paint it up, I'm gonna play with it, and I'm gonna have a great time. Thanks for watching.